When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. They say silence is peaceful, but they're wrong. Silence can scream. It was quiet that evening, too quiet for a man like me, a man who had once lived inside the noise. Courtroom monologues, elevator pitches, lullabies in the middle of the night to a baby who no longer fit in the crib, laughter echoing in Sunday kitchens. All of it noise I used to call life, but not that night. The sound of rain tapping against the window was the only sign that the world still moved outside the apartment. Inside, I sat in my office, staring at a drawer I hadn't opened in 3 years. The drawer was bottom right, old walnut, cool metal handle, and hiding a secret that I had promised myself I would never touch again. A black Colt revolver, wrapped in a beige handkerchief, tucked between law journals and unopened letters from my wife. Its weight wasn't physical yet, I hadn't picked it up, but my chest felt like it had swallowed it whole. I was alone. No, not exactly. There was a photograph on the desk, Clara and Elise. Clara with her auburn hair and half smile that always saw through my arrogance. Elise, 7, with her missing front teeth and a pink headband shaped like cat ears. She had drawn a crayon sun in the top corner of that picture, right on the glass. It was the last gift she had handed me before I left for one more trip. I never came back. It's strange. You think when you decide to die, the moment will be thunderous, emotional, dramatic. But the truth, it's eerily logical. You don't cry, you calculate. You list the debts no one sees, emotional, moral, existential. You weigh your own presence like an asset depreciating in a spreadsheet only you understand. And at the end of the column, there's a negative sign. Then comes the drawer. I don't know when I decided it was tonight. Maybe it was the look in my assistant's eyes when I forgot Elise's birthday, or the fact that I couldn't feel warmth in my hands anymore, even under boiling water. Maybe it was nothing, or everything. I stood up slowly. Each step toward the drawer felt like peeling skin. My fingers wrapped around the handle. Cold. I pulled. The gun stared back like an old friend I had abandoned, wrapped like a relic, almost sacred. I reached for it, not with hesitation, but with resignation. When you stop believing you're worthy of pain, even fear becomes irrelevant. I sat back down, placed it on the desk, and for a moment everything paused. I imagined Clara getting the call. Maybe she would scream. Maybe she'd just sit down and say nothing. Elise wouldn't understand. Not for a while. I pictured her asking Clara where Daddy went. Clara might tell her the truth eventually, or lie. Say I went away for work again, like always. But what really made me pause was with their grief. It was the thought of Elise wondering, did Daddy not love us enough to stay? That nearly broke me, but not enough. I pressed the barrel against my temple, a long breath. Click. Not the gun my mind, a memory. Clara crying in the kitchen 6 months ago. She said, "You're here, but not really here. You're a shadow." I didn't answer. I poured whiskey. I walked away. Second click, Elise drawing a picture for school. A family of 3, but I had no face. She said, "I don't remember your smile, Daddy." Third click, my father's funeral. I was 11. He died by suicide. No note, no warning, just a folded suit and a closed casket. I once promised myself I would never do that to my own child. And here I was, finger on trigger, coward dressed in intellect. I looked back at the photo. The son Elise drew now looked more like an eye, watching me, judging, or begging. I pulled the hammer back. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. But I felt something else. The kind of silence that feels alive. Then boom, but not the gun. Something else cracked. My heart? My mind? I don't remember falling. Just a strange sound, like rushing wind and a voice that sounded like mine saying, "I'm sorry." Then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the office floor. Strange. No blood, no pain, no gun. The drawer was closed again. I stood up. My limbs moved, but I felt no weight, no breath. The photo of Clara and Elise was gone. The room looked different, dustless, airless. I walked out into the hallway. My shoes didn't make a sound. My footsteps didn't exist. The front door was open. Outside, rain still fell, but it no longer touched the ground. The world had paused. Something was wrong. I turned back and saw my body still slumped in the chair, eyes wide, skin pale. The gun dropped beside me. I screamed. Nothing came out. I ran back to myself, tried to shake my own shoulders. My hand passed through. I was dead, and I was still here. That's when it began. The after. Not heaven, not hell. Something in between. A place where you don't get judged, just shown. Forced to walk the hallways of your choices. I stood in the rain, a ghost in my own life, and the world moved without me. I thought dying would be the end, but it was only the beginning, and soon I would have to watch what I had left behind. The pain I thought I had escaped from was just getting started. They buried me on a Wednesday. It was cloudy but not rainy, the kind of day that forgets how to feel, just like I did in the end. I stood beside my own casket, still unsure what I had become. Ghost, remnant, punishment. There were people around, all in black, some familiar, most not. Colleagues from the law firm, a few distant friends, neighbors who probably came more for obligation than grief. They looked at Clara like she was porcelain cracked, but still expected to hold form. No one dared touch her. She stood frozen beside Elise. No tears, not even a twitch. Grief doesn't always cry. Sometimes it calcifies. The priest read from a small Bible, eyes downcast. I barely heard him. I was focused on Elise. She wore a little black dress, her hair in the same pink cat ear headband she wore in the photo on my desk. Her fingers gripped the side of Clara's coat with such force it looked like she was trying to anchor herself to existence. She leaned toward Clara and whispered something. I moved closer, desperate to hear. "Why is everyone saying Daddy went to sleep? He didn't even say goodnight." Clara didn't respond. Her jaw was clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might break. She didn't look at the casket. Not once. They lowered me into the earth as if I were a packaged something to be shelved in soil. I watched the shovel scrape gravel, then thud into the ground above me. I imagined Elise hearing that sound in her sleep years from now. I imagined Clara dreaming of it between pills and broken sleep. I imagined myself decomposing while the world kept spinning. And then I wondered, why was I still here? They left the cemetery in a black car that drove too fast and said too little. I followed. There was no weight to me now. I moved without effort. The laws of physics had lost interest in me. Back at our home, silence bloomed in every room like mold. Clara didn't turn on the lights. Elise took off her shoes like she had come home from a normal school day. Then she ran to the living room and sat cross-legged by the fireplace. She took out her coloring book, flipped past the princess pages. She began to draw a house. 3 windows. 2 people. Only 2. Clara poured herself a drink. Neat. Whiskey. Mine. She never liked it. Said it tasted like smoke and secrets. Now she drank it like water. I wanted to scream, "Don't let her see you like this." But my voice didn't exist here. I was a shadow trailing a storm I created. Later that night, Clara took down the photo of us on our wedding day. She placed it in a drawer, gently, like a fragile crime scene. She opened the closet and gathered my clothes into trash bags. Every suit, every tie, every shirt she once pressed for me before trial, gone. She paused when she reached the drawer with my cologne. She opened it slowly, as if afraid of the smell. She picked up the bottle, stared at it, and for a moment her lips moved. I leaned in. She whispered, "How dare you?" Then she threw the bottle across the room. Glass shattered. The scent filled the air, ghostly and arrogant. Like me, Elise had trouble sleeping. She clutched a pillow against her chest and whispered into it, "I think Daddy forgot us." I sat beside her, or thought I did, but her head passed through me as she rolled over. I watched her cry into a pillow shaped like a star. She didn't wail, didn't call for help, just cried like she had already accepted a truth bigger than her age allowed, a truth I left behind like a stain. Over the next few days, things only worsened. Clara stopped answering calls. The doorbell rang and she didn't move. She would sit in the kitchen, staring at the wall, Elise's cereal growing soggy, untouched. I tried to shout, to move things. I thought maybe ghosts in movies were real. Maybe I could write him sorry on a fogged mirror, turn off a light, something, anything. But nothing I touched stayed touched. Nothing I screamed echoed. I was a presence only in punishment. Then came the whispers, not from Elise, from the walls, from the spaces between memories, from the photographs that now turned slightly on the wall as if resisting my face. They whispered truths I had tried to outrun. You left them alone. You didn't give them a choice. You thought death would end your pain. It multiplied it. And worst of all, she is unraveling. And you're watching. One night, Clara stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. She took a razor from the cabinet, not to use, just to hold. Then she put it back. She looked up at her reflection and said aloud, "I can't be the strong one forever." Her voice cracked like porcelain. Then came the tears. Finally. But I didn't feel relief. I felt terror, because I saw it now. My death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a trigger, a blueprint, an echo Elise would carry in her bones. A model Clara might follow if the weight grew heavier. And I was still here because someone needed to see it, to witness the ruin in full. There is no greater curse than clarity after consequence. No deeper hell than hindsight lived in slow motion. At my funeral, Clara didn't cry, but every moment since she's been dying in pieces. And I, Nathaniel Cross, proud lawyer, smart man, loving husband, I wasn't a martyr. I wasn't a tragic figure. I was a man who chose silence over vulnerability, escape over struggle. And the people I loved were left in the debris. The second night after the funeral, Elise placed a paper on the windowsill. It was a drawing, 3 stick figures. One was faded. Over it, she had written, "This is Daddy. He went away. I hope he remembers me." I dropped to my knees, though they didn't make contact, and I wept, soundlessly, invisibly. My daughter hoped I remembered her, when in truth I died forgetting myself. Elise no longer sleeps in her room, not since the funeral, not since the quiet started speaking back. She now curls up on the living room couch every night under a pale blue blanket Clara once crocheted when she was pregnant with her. The blanket still smells faintly of lavender, safe, familiar, unlike her bedroom now. Her bedroom used to be a temple of pinks and purples and glitter, stickers half peeled on the walls, glow-in-the-dark stars taped unevenly to the ceiling, a little dream catcher above the headboard that she made during art class. She used to say it caught bad thoughts. Now she says it doesn't work anymore. I stood at the threshold of her room that evening. The door was ajar, just enough for light to slant across the floor in a thin strip, like a blade drawn from a scabbard. Inside, the air had changed. It was colder, stiller. Not just from absence, but avoidance. The pink curtains didn't move. The stuffed animals had been pushed off the bed and now lay in a pile in the corner, like forgotten soldiers after a war no one won. The nightlighter, moonlight friend, she called it, was off. She hadn't asked Clara to turn it on in over a week. Clara stood in the hallway that night, looking into the room but never stepping in. She held Elise's pajamas in her hand, absent-mindedly crumpled into a fist. Her eyes scanned the room like it belonged to someone else now. It did. Rooms change when grief enters. They absorb it like walls take in smoke, and sometimes they become haunted not by ghosts, but by memory. Downstairs, Elise sat on the couch, hugging my hoodie, the old gray one I used to wear on lazy Sundays. The one with the hole in the left sleeve she used to poke her fingers through and giggle. She pressed it to her face and whispered, "It still smells like him." Clara watched from the stairs. She didn't say anything. Her lips moved a little, silently rehearsing the things she wished she could say. Then she turned around and walked away. That night, Elise had a nightmare. I know because I was there hovering like an unwanted echo. She writhed under the blanket, her tiny fists clenched, sweat on her forehead, and then she cried out in her sleep. "Don't go, Daddy. Please don't go." Her voice tore through me. I knelt beside her, tried to touch her cheek. My hand passed through like wind through smoke. I spoke, or tried to. "I'm here, baby. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," but she didn't hear. She turned away from me in her sleep, like she knew I was there, but didn't want to feel it. The next morning, Clara sat Elise down for breakfast. Neither of them touched their food. Elise asked, "Do people who die ever come back?" Clara froze. Her spoon hovered over the bowl of cereal. She didn't look up. Just said, "No, sweetheart, they don't." Elise thought for a second, then quietly replied, "I think Daddy's still here. I heard him in my room last night." Clara dropped the spoon. It clanged against the table, jarring and raw. She stood up, walked away, and closed the bathroom door behind her. I followed her in, ashamed of what I might find. She stood in front of the mirror again. Her eyes looked sunken, like sleep had forgotten how to visit her. She stared at her reflection. Then slowly, deliberately, she whispered, "Please, don't let her become like you." I felt it like a slap, not because she blamed me, she had every right to, but because I saw it now. I hadn't just left them. I had opened a door they didn't want to walk through, but now had no choice but to face. And Elise, in all her innocence, was teetering on the edge of it, curious, confused, hurting in ways she couldn't name. That evening, Clara tried to put Elise to bed in her own room. She carried her up the stairs gently, like holding a wound. When they reached the doorway, Elise clung to her. "Mommy, can't I sleep downstairs? It's scary in here." The walls talk. Clara knelt down, kissed her forehead, and said, "Walls don't talk, baby. That's just your heart being too full." But Elise didn't let go. "I hear him, Mommy. He says sorry." Clara froze. A beat of silence. Then she held Elise tighter. "You don't have to listen, okay? Just listen to Mommy." Elise fell asleep in her mother's arms that night, not in her bed, but on the hallway floor outside the door. Clara didn't move her. She just lay beside her on the carpet, staring at the ceiling. I stood above them, helpless. This was the price of escape, of silence, of giving up. It wasn't just your own pain you buried, it was the ripple you sent out into people who had no armor. Later that week, Clara began seeing a therapist. I watched her sit in that small office, fingers knotted in her lap. She didn't say much the first 2 sessions, but on the third, she said something that broke me. He didn't leave a note, but every time he looked in the mirror, it was a goodbye. The therapist nodded gently. Clara continued. Now she looks in the mirror and asks if she's next. That night, Clara packed up Elise's room. She took down the glow stars, folded the blankets, stored the toys. It wasn't a funeral. It was a pause, like she was pressing save on a game she no longer had the energy to finish. Elise came in, confused. "Why are you taking my room away?" Clara knelt again, holding back tears. "You can sleep where you feel safe. Well, bring your room to wherever your heart feels better." Elise nodded, then whispered, "Can we bring Daddy too?" That night, Clara lay in Elise's new bed, now the couch, with her arms around her daughter. She read from a storybook. Her voice trembled, but stayed steady. Elise drifted off before the last page. Clara kissed her forehead, and then, only then, she cried. For the first time, she let the flood come. Silent, violent, private. I sat in the corner, feeling every sob like a knife through fog. I wanted to hold her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, to ask if she still remembered my laugh. But all I could do was watch, because Elise no longer slept in her room, and I no longer existed in their world, only in their wounds. Grief speaks in silence, but sometimes it writes. It happened on a Thursday morning, early. The light was thin and gray, filtering through a sky that hadn't decided whether to cry or not. Clara woke up disoriented on the couch. Elise still curled under her arm. Her neck ached. Her eyes were dry. The kind of dry that doesn't come from lack of tears, but from too many. She sat up slowly, adjusted Elise's blanket, and shuffled toward the bathroom. Not out of routine, she hadn't had any since the funeral, but out of instinct. A faint urge to brush teeth, splash water, pretend there was still a day ahead worth preparing for. The house was quiet, but not empty. I was already there. I had started haunting the bathroom mirror, not in the Hollywood Sensino foggy apparition or flickering lights, just presence, a hum behind the silence, a chill beneath the skin. I lingered where I had once stood, where I used to shave, fix my tie, mutter opening statements before court, the place where I once kissed Claire on the forehead while she brushed her hair. Now it was all cold porcelain and broken routines, and her reflection, tired, pale, absent. She didn't see me, but for a second, maybe a second too long, she paused before turning on the light. The mirror fogged slightly as she turned on the tap. Steam began to rise, and then it happened. The message appeared slowly, drawn from condensation like fingers writing from nowhere. 3 words, faint, trembling. "I'm so sorry." Clara froze. The toothbrush in her hand dropped into the sink with a dull clatter. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to reset the world. The words remained, still wet, still real, still there. I didn't plan to write it. I didn't know I could. But some part of me, maybe the part still tethered to love, to shame, to unfinished things, had found a way to scream. Not loudly, just honestly. Clara didn't move for nearly a full minute. She stared into the mirror, not at the words, at her own reflection. She was trembling. Her lips parted, but no sound came. And then finally she whispered, "No, you don't get to do that." She grabbed a towel, wiped the mirror clean with a single hard swipe. The words vanished, but not from her. She stared at the now blank glass. Her reflection stared back hollow-eyed, hair tangled, skin pale as paper. She whispered again, "You don't get to haunt me after leaving me here." And then she sank to the floor, back against the vanity, knees drawn to her chest, and she began to shake, not cry, just tremble like a building about to collapse. Elise knocked on the door a moment later. "Mommy, are you okay?" Clara pulled herself up instantly, her arms still weak, her voice hoarse. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just tired." She splashed water on her face, and as she opened the door, I saw it briefly in her eyes. She hadn't wiped away the message. She had absorbed it, and it would follow her. That day, Clara made phone calls. To her sister, to the therapist, even to the school counselor, asking how Elise was doing in virtual learning. It wasn't much, but it was movement. I followed her through every call, every pause, every sigh, every time she stared at the mirror across the room like it might speak again. But it didn't. Not that day. Some truths only need to be whispered once. The echo carries the rest. That night something changed. Elise had another nightmare, yes. But when she woke up crying, Clara didn't hesitate. She scooped her up, held her close, and whispered, "Daddy loved you so much," Elise asked between sobs. "Then why did he leave?" Clara's voice cracked. Because he forgot how to love himself. And sometimes that makes people disappear. Elise blinked. Will you disappear too? Clara swallowed a scream, held her daughter tighter. No, baby, I promise. I'm staying, even when it's hard. I sat beside them, or something like it. The couch didn't shift with my weight. The air didn't move when I breathed. But in that moment, I felt closer than I had in days. Closer than I deserved to be. Clara didn't see me, but Elise. She looked toward the corner of the room, not afraid, just looking. She smiled softly and said, I think Daddy hears you, Mommy. Later that night, Clara returned to the bathroom. The mirror had long cleared, but she wrote something of her own, using her finger on the glass. 3 words, small, gentle, still here. And for the first time since my death, I wept. Not from guilt, not from regret, but from the unbearable beauty of being remembered. Mirrors used to be harmless. They were just glass neutral, silent, reflective. They showed you what you looked like, rarely what you were. But now they had turned on me. Now they told the truth. It started with a flicker. The hallway mirror, a long, narrow panel beside the staircase, used to catch the morning light. Elise would twirl in front of it before school, checking if her shoes looked fast. I used to comb my hair in it, mumbling case strategies under my breath. But ever since the morning Clara saw the message in the bathroom, the mirror had begun acting differently. I would see myself in it, not my reflection. Me, as I am now, not pale and dead, not some floating spirit, but a version of me that looked like I used to, only wrong. Eyes darker, smile missing, posture rigid, like I was being forced to hold something heavy just outside the frame. One night, Clara passed the mirror holding a load of laundry. She didn't look directly at it, but I did, and my reflection, my other, tilted its head at me. I froze. It didn't mirror my movement. It studied me, not with judgment, with recognition, the kind that says, you did this, you know. Then it vanished. I began to see him everywhere, in the silver lining of the microwave door, in the black TV screen before it flicked on, in the windows at night, when the outside became reflection instead of view. Always the same expression, tired, accusing, familiar. He wasn't haunting me. He was me, the part that pulled the trigger, the part that believed escape was noble. One evening, Clara stood at the mirror, brushing Elise's hair. Elise asked, why don't we put pictures of Daddy up anymore? Clara's hand paused. The brush stilled mid-stroke. Because it hurts, sweetie, to see him and know he's not here. Elise looked at her own reflection, then said, but I still see him sometimes, in here. She pointed to the glass. Clara glanced up, startled. For a split second, I swear she saw it too. Her eyes locked on something me, and her mouth opened, but no sound came. Then she looked away. Later that night, I stood before the bathroom mirror again, the same one where the message appeared. I studied my own eyes. They didn't blink. They didn't look back. They looked through, and suddenly I heard a voice. My own, not in my head, not echoing. Just there. You're not done, I whispered. Who are you? The voice replied. The part of you that stayed behind. I leaned in closer. The reflection did not lean with me. It stood still, as if on the other side of a window I was never meant to open. Why am I still here? I asked. The answer was instant. Because you didn't leave alone. That hit like ice. I shook my head. I didn't take anyone with me. The voice softened, almost mournful. You didn't have to. You left wounds. They walk on their own. I wanted to run, but where do the dead run to? I turned away, stepped back, but my reflection didn't follow. It lingered, staring into the space I just occupied, as if waiting for me to return and accept something it'd been avoiding. The next morning, Elise refused to go near the hallway mirror. She covered it with a blanket. Clara asked why. Elise said, because sometimes Daddy's there, but he's not smiling, and I don't think it's really him. Clara removed the blanket gently, looked into the glass. She stood there a long while quiet. Then she said to herself, I still wear your face, but I don't recognize myself in it. I thought mirrors were for vanity. Now I see they're for revelation. You don't see who you are. You see who you're becoming. And the truth is this. I became a warning, a symbol on the glass for those still breathing. That night, I tried to face myself again, fully. I stood in front of the mirror in the dark. No lights, just me and the outline. And I asked, what do I do now? The reflection moved, spoke. You watch, you learn, you hurt, until you understand what you're leaving created. And then you try to save what's left. As I turned away, I caught a glimpse of Elise behind me, not in the room, in the mirror. She was holding my hoodie again, tears in her eyes. And in that reflection, I saw something new. Not just pain, but possibility. A crack of light in the dark glass. Maybe, just maybe, I hadn't completely disappeared. Maybe I still had something left to give. Even if it wasn't my presence. Even if it was only a warning. There's something unnatural about 3:33 a.m. It's not just a number, it's a silence that hums. A breath the world forgets to take. The kind of hour where reality feels thinner. Where grief walks closer. Where time doesn't tick, it drips. And on that night, the phone rang. It startled Clara awake. She'd been asleep on the couch again, Elise curled against her chest like a small question mark of warmth. The house was dark. The kind of dark that feels wet, thick, listening. The ring pierced it like a needle. Landline. No one used it anymore. Not since the cell phones took over. But it rang. Loud. Sharp. Real. Clara sat up slowly. Confused. Dazed. 3:33. She checked the clock twice, as if it might blink into something less ominous. It didn't. She rose, carefully shifting Elise onto a pillow. The phone was in the kitchen. It rang again. And again, until she picked it up. Hello? Static. Soft. Like wind dragging across a microphone. Clara's fingers tensed around the receiver. Then a voice. Faint. Broken. Breathing. And then barely audible, don't let her follow me. Clara staggered back, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The voice came again. Don't let her follow. Then silence. Not a click. Not a disconnect. Just the kind of void that feels permanent. She stood frozen, the handset still in her hand, the line still alive. A small beep eventually sounded. She hadn't spoken a single word. Then she placed the receiver back on its cradle with trembling fingers. Her knees gave way. She sank to the floor, back against the cabinet, breathing in short, dry gasps. I was there, watching, unable to move. I didn't recognize the voice she heard, but I knew the words, because I had been thinking them for days. Don't let her follow me. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat up until dawn, her back to the wall, the phone staring at her like a loaded gun. When Elise came downstairs rubbing her eyes, Clara greeted her with a long, lingering hug that made the little girl pause and ask, Did you have another bad dream, Mommy? Clara shook her head, but she didn't speak. She just held on tighter, as if something invisible was trying to pull Elise away. Later that day, Clara took the phone off the hook, not because she feared it ringing again, but because she feared what she might hear if it did. She sat at the dining table, staring at the wall across from her, tapping her fingers nervously against the wood. And then, without warning, she grabbed a pen and paper. She began to write. Words poured out of her like water from a cracked pipe. Not a letter, not a journal, just fragmented thoughts. Sentences like, she still sees him. How do I raise a child to not follow a ghost? What if I'm not enough? How do I tell her he didn't mean to leave? I read over her shoulder, heart burning with guilt. She was speaking to me, and she didn't even know if I was still listening. I wanted to shout, "I am, I swear I am. I never wanted this." But the paper didn't move. The pen kept writing, and the silence swallowed me again. That evening, Elise asked a question, the kind that splits a mother open. "Mommy, what happens if I get sad the way Daddy was sad?" Clara choked on her answer. Her throat tightened. Her chest trembled. But she looked her daughter in the eye and said, "Then we talk. We hug. We fight it together. Because you're not alone. Ever." Elise nodded slowly, then added softly, "I don't want to disappear like Daddy." That was the moment I felt something in me break. Not as a ghost, not as a man, as a father. That night the phone rang again. Same time. 3:33. This time Clara didn't answer. She sat on the floor staring at it, daring it to scream again. It rang once, twice, stopped. The silence afterward was thicker than the call, like the house was holding its breath. But something else happened. Something stranger. When Clara went into the bathroom an hour later, she found the mirror fogged again, even though she hadn't turned on the tap. And written there, in a new hand, was a sentence. "She is still whole. Don't let her break." She covered her mouth. Tears came hot and fast, not out of fear, out of knowing she wasn't going insane, because someone, something, still cared enough to warn her, to beg her to protect the only piece of light left. The next day, Clara unplugged the landline. She sat Elise down and told her, "Sometimes the past tries to call, but we don't always have to answer." Elise didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. Then she handed Clara a drawing. It was a picture of a big hand holding a smaller hand. Above them, written in child's scrawl, "Don't let go." I stood there in the hallway, in the living room, in the mirror, and I wanted so badly to scream, I want, ever let go again." But that wasn't mine to promise anymore. It was hers, Clara's, Elise's, the living. They were the ones who still had hands to hold, and I was the whisper behind a disconnected line, just hoping they never pick up again. Children see things we don't. They see the edges of the world fray. They hear what adults have trained themselves to ignore. They trust the shadows longer than we allow ourselves to. And Elise had started talking about the one under her bed. It began with small comments. "Mommy, something's watching me when I sleep." Or, "The shadows mean her at night." Clara assumed it was grief manifesting, or nightmares, or imagination. But I knew better, because I saw it too. It wasn't just a shadow, it had shape, a form that rippled like oil in water. It didn't crawl, it waited, and it lived in the space I once filled, in the void I left behind. Elise's room had been closed for weeks now, but that didn't stop the thing beneath the bed from growing. Some nights when Clara sat on the couch, dozing off mid-sentence with the TV humming low, Elise would wake with a jolt. Eyes wide, breath caught, frozen. I would rush to her, whispering her name even though I knew she couldn't hear, and every time her gaze would be fixed on the crack beneath her old bedroom door. One night Clara decided to try something. She took Elise upstairs. Together they opened the door. The air inside was heavier, cooler, still untouched. Clara turned on the light. Everything looked as it had months ago. The stuffed animals on the shelf, the drawings taped to the walls, the glow stars on the ceiling, slightly peeling at the edges, and the bed, still made, still perfect, too perfect. Clara sat on the edge and said, "See? Nothing scary." Elise stood by the doorway, refused to step in. She pointed, "It's under there." Clara crouched down, lifted the sheet that hung over the frame. Nothing, just dust, a pair of slippers, a forgotten sock. But Elise didn't blink, didn't move. She whispered, "It's not scared of you, only me." That night, Elise cried in her sleep, tears leaking silently from shut eyes. Clara rocked her, humming some half-remembered lullaby, her voice cracking between the notes. And I sat across the room, watching, and I saw it, for the first time clearly, a shape moving beneath the couch, a slow, deliberate crawl, but not toward Clara, not toward Elise, toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't. It rose through the floor not like smoke, not like mist, but like memory. It wore my face, twisted, empty, like the man Elise remembered in glimpses, not full, not real. The shadow opened its mouth, but no sound came. Only one word etched into the silence: replaced. It wasn't haunting Elise. It was feeding on her grief, on the emptiness I left behind. And worse, it was becoming me in her memory, the version of me who left without saying goodbye, the one she saw in the mirror, the one she heard in her sleep. The next morning, Elise refused to speak. She pointed at the TV screen off and said, "Hez inside again." Clara turned it on. Static. She unplugged it. Still static. Until finally the image cleared. Just a brief flicker. Not a face. Not a voice. But a drawing. Childlike. 3 stick figures. One of them crossed out. Clara froze. She dropped the remote, turned off the TV, held Elise and said, "You are safe, I promise." Elise didn't answer, but she whispered to the ceiling, "Hez sad, but he's not my daddy anymore." That night, Clara dreamed of the hospital. She was holding newborn Elise in her arms. I was beside her, smiling, overwhelmed. And then the lights went out, and in the dream's darkness, a voice whispered, "You gave her life. He gave her the wound." She woke up screaming. I tried to fight it, tried to stand between Elise and the shadow, night after night, but I had no weight, no power, only guilt, only watching. Until one night, Elise sat up in bed and said aloud, "Daddy, stop scaring me." The shadow under the bed froze. The room stilled, and for the first time it recoiled, because even grief, when named, loses some of its poison. Clara came running into the room, held her close, asked what happened, and Elise said, "Hez still here, but I don't want him like this." Clara looked around the room, at the stuffed animals, the art, the glow stars, and said, "Then let's give him a better place to stay." Together they lit a candle, not to summon me, not to remember the pain, but to remind themselves I once lived. They placed it by the window, small, warm, safe, and as it flickered, the shadow shrank, then dissolved, and I, for the first time, felt something lift from me. Not forgiveness, but a fraction of release. That night, Elise slept in her room, not on the couch, and she whispered before closing her eyes, "You can stay, Daddy, but only if you're kind." I cried, not because I deserved her grace, but because she gave it anyway. Children see what we don't. They see through shadows, and sometimes they shine through them. It didn't happen in a dream. It happened somewhere between a thought and a memory, where time forgets to obey and logic begins to melt. I found myself standing in a hallway I didn't recognize. It stretched endlessly in both directions, walls lined with doors, none of them labeled. No sounds, no breeze. Just the faint smell of smoke, not fresh, not sharp. The kind of smoke that seeps into the wallpaper and never leaves. The air here was warm, too warm, like a fire had passed through and never quite died. I don't know how I arrived, only that I was meant to. I chose a door. My hand passed through the knob effortlessly. The door opened on its own. Inside was a room filled with books, thousands of them, stacked on shelves that climbed so high they disappeared into shadows. But it wasn't grand. It wasn't a library of knowledge. It was a library of me. Each book bore no title, just a date. Some had names scratched on the spine in my handwriting. Clara, Elise, Dad, Courtroom 47B, the day I forgot Elise's birthday. I reached for one labeled simply, Lila, my mother. The moment I opened it, the room changed. I was 11 again, at the funeral. My father's closed casket in front of me. Lila's face expressionless, numb, her hands trembling in her lap. I was sitting beside her, wearing shoes that were too tight. The pastor was talking. I didn't listen. I was staring at my father's casket and wondering why no one would tell me what happened. I remembered thinking, he just went to sleep, but no one says when he's waking up. I shut the book, hard. The scene vanished. The library returned. The next book pulled itself from the shelf, floated gently, landed at my feet. Its spine read, Clara, April 12. I hesitated, then opened it, and I saw our fight. Not the loud one, the quiet one, the one where she stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of tea, eyes wet, voice calm, and said, I don't recognize you anymore. You're here, but you're not. And I responded by checking my phone. The books kept coming, page after page. Day after day, I had erased, rewritten, buried under rationalizations. There were entire shelves dedicated to the things I didn't say. Chapters labeled, when she asked for help and I pretended I didn't hear Elise's first nightmare. I didn't wake up for that smile Clara gave me before I shut the door. And then I saw it, a section where the books were blackened, burned at the edges, some crumbling at the spine, unopenable, untouchable. I reached for one, fingers trembling. The cover read, May 17th, the day you chose to leave. As I touched it, the leather peeled like skin. It disintegrated. Ash scattered at my feet. I couldn't read it. The moment was gone, lost to flame. And suddenly I realized these were the memories I had tried to burn. The moments I had convinced myself didn't matter, that no one would remember. But they had remembered. Clara, Elise. They were living in the ruins of what I had scorched. I moved deeper into the library. Shelves grew darker, pages more fragile. Some books were chained shut. Others bled ink as if the words themselves were ashamed. I found a table in the center of the room. One book lay open, its pages blank. Its title, Elise the Day After. I leaned closer, and slowly in faint gray strokes, words began to appear. She called for you today, just once, then stopped. She asked if she had done something wrong. She wonders why you didn't say goodbye. I couldn't breathe, even in this place beyond breath. Suddenly the room began to shake. Shelves rattled. Flames erupted along the ceiling, licking the corners of the air. Books began to fall, one after another, hundreds of them. And in the chaos, a voice boomed not outside me, but from within. You left a trail of ashes and called it love. I collapsed to my knees, tried to gather the books, tried to preserve what little memory remained. But every time I touched them, they burned. Every page turned to smoke. Every story erased itself. In the distance, I saw a figure, small, shaking. It was Elise, holding a single book to her chest, crying. Behind her, the fire closed in. I ran to her, screamed her name. Elise! But I didn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. Time slowed. My voice dissolved in heat. And then from the smoke, a second figure appeared. Clara. She lifted Elise into her arms, looked straight at me through the fire, and whispered, We are not your afterthought. I woke up gasping, if the dead can wake, back in the hallway of our old home. The lights flickered. The air still smelled of smoke, but there were no flames, only the echo of what I had seen. Later that day, Clara found one of Elise's old drawings in the attic, a picture of me, Clara, and Elise all holding hands. But the figure of me was burned at the edges, as if Elise had held it too close to a candle, or maybe memories catch fire when they're abandoned. That night, Clara placed the drawing on the fridge, didn't say a word, just stood there staring. And I stood beside her reflection in the window and said softly, though she couldn't hear, I'm trying to rebuild what I burned. The library still exists, somewhere, a place where our mistakes are cataloged in volumes we hope no one ever reads. But memory doesn't die when we do. It lingers, and the ones we love live among the ashes. I thought they already buried me. I watched the casket, felt the weight of the soil, saw the black dresses and stiff hugs and a pastor reciting scriptures for a man he never knew. But that wasn't my funeral. That was my death. My real funeral came later, and I was the only one in attendance. It began like the others, sudden, surreal, wrong. One moment I was standing at the foot of Elise's bed, listening to her breath rise and fall. The next it was somewhere else. A chapel, old, abandoned, but pristine in its decay. The stained glass windows were cracked, but the light still poured in. Dust floated like ash. Candles burned in places that shouldn't have held flame. And at the front, resting in silence, was a second casket. Mine. Again. But this one was different. It wasn't surrounded by flowers or family. It was surrounded by versions of me. There was the Nathaniel who stayed late at the office, missing Elise's school recital. The Nathaniel who answered him fine every time Clara asked what was wrong. The Nathaniel who stood at the kitchen sink, back turned, while Clara cried softly at the table. The Nathaniel who, when Elise asked, "Will you play with me?" said, "Maybe tomorrow," again and again, until the tomorrow stopped coming. They lined the pews in silence, dozens of me, all dressed in different regrets. Some wore suits, some wore shadows. One stood in the back, face turned away, trembling. I knew which one he was, the one who pulled the trigger. I approached the casket slowly, no music, no priest, just the sound of my own steps echoing into eternity. The casket was open, inside not my corpse, but a mirror, a long, perfect reflection of myself. Not as I had been, as I could have been, eyes full of life, shoulders not burdened by guilt, a father, a husband, a man who stayed. I looked into those eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't become you." And the reflection whispered back, "You still might." Behind me, the versions of myself began to rise, not in anger, in mourning. They approached the casket. One by one, they placed things beside it, a coffee mug, a birthday card never signed, a courtroom sketch, a forgotten voicemail, a torn photo. Each item a tiny eulogy, a farewell to who I was and who I failed to be. Then Clara walked in, wearing the same sweater she wore the night we met. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't even sad. They were tired. She approached the casket and didn't look inside. She just said, "You left us, and I still have to carry you." She turned and walked away. Elise followed behind her, holding a crayon drawing. It showed a house, a son, two people, only two. She looked right at me and said, "I drew you, but then erased you, because you erased yourself first." I fell to my knees. The chapel cracked. The stained glass wept. The versions of me began to fade one by one, vanishing into dust, until only I remained, me, not as I was, not as I could have been, just the echo, the shadow, the remainder. The casket began to close on its own. The lid shut with a deep, final sound. But I wasn't inside. I was outside, staring at it. And for the first time since my death, I realized what this was. A funeral not for my life, but for my impact. For the ripple I had left. The hole I had become. I stood in the silence, the chapel now empty. And I asked the only question I hadn't dared to say aloud until now. Can I undo this? The room responded not with words, but with a breeze. Soft, cool, forgiving. Then a whisper, barely audible. "You can try." When I awoke, I was standing in the living room. Elise was drawing again. Clara was folding laundry. The world was still broken, but it was still there. And for the first time in this long, haunting journey, I no longer wanted to be seen. I wanted to serve, to protect, to heal, even if only as a presence in the corner of their world. Even if only as the voice that said, Not this time. Not again. I buried myself in that chapel and walked away from the grave with one purpose: make sure no one else follows me into it. Some words are too late, others arrive just in time, and some like mine hover in between. It began in a dusty corner of the old hallway closet. Clara was cleaning, not to tidy the house, but to empty it. She had begun boxing pieces of me: old ties, unopened books, courtroom notes I never reread, things that once carried my scent, my shape. Now they just carried silence. Elise was at school her first week back. Clara was alone, determined, until she found the envelope, cream-colored, heavy, no stamp, no seal, just her name, in my handwriting. Clara, I had written it months before I died. One of those nights when the storm was quiet and the shame louder than the wind. I never mailed it. I buried it inside that closet like a coward hiding a confession inside drywall. And yet she found it. She didn't open it at first. She held it to her chest like it was still warm. Then slowly she sat on the floor beside a box marked Nathaniel's things. She peeled it open with shaking fingers. She began to read. Clara, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll be brave enough to leave it somewhere you can find. But I have to say this somewhere, even if it rots inside this envelope forever. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for disappearing slowly enough that it didn't look like running. I'm sorry for the quiet, for being a room you couldn't enter, a man you couldn't reach. You loved me, not the version I pretended to be, the messy one, the scarred one, the real one. And I still walked away. Her hands trembled, her mouth quivered, but she kept reading. You once told me that loving someone is an act of staying, even when it's hard, even when the world screams for an exit. I forgot how to stay, Clara, not because I stopped loving you, because I stopped loving myself. I stood behind her, invisible, watching, regretting every second it took me to write those words instead of say them when I had the chance. Tell Elise that I was broken, not because of her, but despite her light. That her laughter was the only sound that made my chest feel whole. That her drawings kept me from disappearing sooner. That when she asked me if I liked her new dress and I nodded without looking, I lied. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Clara pressed the letter to her face, weeping. Not the hysterical kind, the quiet kind, the grief that becomes air, that fills the lungs instead of oxygen. Then near the end of the letter, I had written something else, something I didn't remember until now, a paragraph I had nearly erased, but left. If there's still time, if the sky opens for even a moment, please don't let her follow me. Not you, not Elise. I thought ending my pain would protect you from it. I was wrong. That night, Clara sat Elise down on the couch. She held the letter in her lap, unsure how much to say. But Elise looked up at her and said, "Was that from Daddy?" Clara paused, then nodded. Elise didn't ask to read it. She just leaned into her mother and whispered, "I still talk to him, you know." Clara smiled tearfully. "What does he say?" Elise replied, "He says sorry, but also thank you for staying." That evening, Clara placed the letter inside a new frame. She didn't hang it on the wall. She kept it on her bedside table, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder, a weight, a warning, and maybe doorway. Later that night, she opened her journal for the first time in months. She wrote, "He tried, he failed, but his failure doesn't have to become ours." I stood at the foot of her bed, silent, still, but no longer ashamed, because my final letter had not saved me, but maybe, just maybe it had saved them. Some stories threaten to repeat themselves. Pain passed down like heirlooms, grief echoing through the walls of a home until it becomes the floor beneath your child's feet. And some nights all it takes is a single thought, a moment of weakness, a hand hovering just long enough for everything to end. The house was too quiet. Clara hadn't spoken much that day. She had driven Elise to school, picked her up, made dinner, tucked her in. routine, efficient, lifeless. The letter had done something to her, not broken her, not healed her. It had shaken something loose. And by midnight, she stood alone in the kitchen, hands pressed against the counter, breathing slow, controlled, too controlled. That kind of control that comes before something irreversible. I stood a few feet away, frozen. I'd never seen her like this. Not during the funeral, not during the nights of sobbing into silence. This wasn't sadness. This was silence deciding to become action. She opened the drawer, the one where the old utility key sat, the one we joked about never needing. She picked it up, walked down the hallway to the laundry room. The gas valve sat behind the cabinet, old, untouched, dusty. She knelt, placed her fingers on the knob, paused. The world stopped breathing. I moved beside her, yelling soundlessly, "Clara, don't. Please. Please don't." I reached for her hand, it passed through. She stared ahead, blank, tired, too tired, and then a sound, soft, fragile. From behind the wall, a voice, Elise, sleepy, muffled, distant, calling from her bedroom. "Mommy?" Clara froze. Not physically, internally. Her eyes widened slightly. Her breath caught. Her hand remained on the gas valve. She didn't speak, didn't move. And then Elise again, softer. "Can I have some water?" Clara rose slowly, like someone waking from a trance. She left the utility room, not in a rush, but as if her legs had been loaned new strength. I followed, trembling. She entered Elise's room. The little girl sat up, eyes half closed, blanket tangled around her knees. Clara sat beside her, handed her the glass on the nightstand. Elise took a sip, then said, "You look like you were going to disappear again." Clara blinked. "What?" Elise rubbed her eyes. "You have that look, the one Daddy had before he left." Clara's voice broke. "Do you remember that?" Elise nodded. "You both looked like you were underwater." Then she added, like it was the most natural thing, "But Daddy's been whispering to me in dreams." Clara tensed. "What does he say?" Elise looked up, solemn. "He says, tell her to stay. Tell her the chain has to end." Clara held Elise so tightly I feared she'd never let go. She didn't cry, not yet, but something snapped, not in the breaking way, in the release, the kind where pressure finally gives way to breath. Later that night, Clara returned to the utility room. I followed her, afraid, but she didn't kneel this time. She stood before the gas valve, stared at it, and whispered, "No more silence." She picked up the wrench, tightened the valve shut, wiped her hands on her jeans, then walked away. In the mirror near the hallway, for just a moment, she saw me. Not my face, not my body, but my silhouette, a shape standing behind her, not haunting, watching. And for the first time since my death, she smiled at the reflection, soft, tired, but real. That night she left the bedroom door open. Light from the hallway poured in. Elise slept soundly. And Clara wrote in her journal, "I came close tonight, closer than I ever want to be again, but he gave me back my edge. Not the pain, the warning, and I will never let Elise learn this by inheritance." I stood in the doorway, watching them both, alive, together, and I whispered to the dark, "Thank you, Elise. You saved her." But then I realized something I hadn't before. Elise hadn't saved Clara alone. Clara had saved herself. She had chosen to stay, and in doing so, had broken the curse I left behind. It happened just before sunrise. Not the sun, not the warmth. Something else. Something I hadn't seen since the moment I died. Light, not from a lamp, not from the sky, but from within the house, from within them. Clara was asleep on the couch again, Elise curled against her chest, one small hand resting on her mother's shoulder. But their breathing was different now, slower, deeper. Not the breath of people enduring the night, but of people resting, of survivors. And in that quiet, something shifted. A thin band of light began to glow along the floorboards. It pulsed, soft, subtle, gold like honey. It didn't come from outside. It came from her. Clara. I stood there breathless, though I no longer breathed. The hallway was illuminated in a way I hadn't seen in weeks, maybe longer. The pictures on the walls shimmered faintly. The cracks in the plaster faded into invisibility. Even the mirror, the one Elise once covered in fear, reflected only warmth now. No shadows, no distorted faces, only the glow. Elise stirred, eyes barely opening. She smiled in her sleep and whispered, "He sees us now." I stepped forward, toward the light. My body didn't resist. For the first time since I put that gun to my head, I felt something lift. Guilt didn't disappear, but it shifted weight. Regret didn't dissolve, but it stopped choking. And for a moment I stood inside the light with them. Not as a ghost, not as a curse, but as memory. Memory with hands, with voice, with love. Clara woke slowly. She sat up, brushing Elise's hair from her forehead, and then she noticed the light too. She looked around, not afraid, just aware. She whispered, "Nathaniel?" And I swear, though I couldn't speak, I answered, in the way the air shifted, in the way the curtain moved, just slightly, in the way her skin warmed beneath her palm. She didn't cry. She smiled, not wide, but real. Later that morning, Clara made pancakes, burned the first batch. Elise laughed, really laughed. The kind that cracked the stale silence of the house into pieces. The kind that stitched something invisible back together. And I stood in the corner of the kitchen, not watching, witnessing. There's a difference. Watching is passive. Witnessing is reverent. That afternoon, they left the house for a walk. The first time Clara had left the property in weeks. Elise wore her pink cat ear headband again. She pointed at flowers, at birds, at clouds. Clara held her hand tightly the entire time. No phone, no distraction, just walking. Alive. As they rounded the corner at the end of the block, Elise turned back, looked at the house, at the front window, at me. I stood still, unsure. Then she waved and mouthed, "Thank you." I felt the light swell again, this time, around me. It wrapped itself across my shoulders, into my chest, and then into the cracks I thought would never close. I wasn't being pulled away. I was being invited forward. The difference? Choice. That evening, Clara lit a single candle at the windowsill. No altar, no ritual, just a flame. She wrote a note on a sticky pad and placed it beside it. It read, "You don't have to haunt us anymore. We remember you. That's enough." The house no longer felt heavy. Rooms had breath again. Mirrors reflected true shapes. And for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, I wasn't just the man who left. I was the man who saw, who stayed long enough to understand, long enough to witness the healing I was never brave enough to believe possible. The light didn't fade. It folded, like a blanket placed on a bed you'll return to later. No urgency, no fear, just peace. Children don't write eulogies. They draw them, not in ink or grief, but in color, in crayons and clumsy shapes, in sunshines that never forget to smile, in houses that always have two windows, even when one is dark. It was Elise who gave me the final gift. She didn't know it, of course. She thought she was just drawing. Sitting at the kitchen table with her little knees tucked under her favorite blanket, tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth, completely lost in the act. Clara was washing dishes. Music played softly from a speaker on the shelf. The window was open. The wind carried no shadows, only air, only light. I hovered in the hallway, half afraid to step closer. Not because I didn't want to see, but because I already knew. There's a stillness that settles just before something sacred happens. This was that. Elise used purple for the sky, not blue, purple her favorite. She used red for the house, the same red she used the last time she drew all three of us. And then yellow for the sun, which had too many rays and a face that looked suspiciously like a smiley sticker. Then she picked up a brown crayon, paused, looked over her shoulder, at nothing, at me, then started drawing the people. First came Clara. She had long legs and a necklace Elise always noticed, even when Clara forgot to wear it. Then herself, with a cat ear headband and a wide, toothy grin. Then a third figure. Me, not faded, not crossed out, not erased, not a shadow, a full figure. Tall, smiling, holding both their hands. And above the heads, in big, uneven letters, she wrote, "My family, even the invisible kind." Clara dried her hands, turned around, and stopped. She looked at the drawing, said nothing for a while, then knelt down beside Elise. "Can I keep this one?" Elise thought for a moment, then nodded. "It's the last one." The words hit like thunder, not because of finality, because of completeness. She had drawn me back in, not as a ghost, not as a warning, but as memory made gentle, love without weight, a shape that no longer hurt. Clara took the drawing, placed it in a frame, and hung it in the hallway, right beside the mirror. The same mirror Elise once covered, the same mirror that once showed my broken reflection. Now it showed something else, a hallway filled with life, a drawing glowing beneath the morning light, and behind it all, stillness, not emptiness, peace. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, "She forgives him in ways I'm still learning how to." But maybe that's the magic of children. They don't forget the wound. They just learn how to draw around it. Today, I stopped waiting for the pain to end and started living despite it. I lingered near Elise's room. She was humming to herself, drawing again, but this time, it wasn't about me. It was a bird, wings wide, flying, and she whispered to the page, "Now you can go, Daddy. I'm okay." Something in me opened, not like a wound, like a door. The light returned softer this time. It wasn't pulling me. It was inviting. And for the first time, I wanted to go, not to escape, but because what I came to witness was complete. The last drawing still hangs in the hallway. Visitors walk past it without knowing. But Clara knows, Elise knows, and I know that in that crooked little house with purple skies and too many sunbeams, I was loved, and I am forgiven. I didn't expect a goodbye. Not really. The dead rarely get permission to leave. Most linger, not by choice, but because of what they never said, what they never fixed. But that night something changed. Something shifted. It began with the sound of a door creaking, not in the house, inside me. It was just past midnight. Clara was asleep, Elise too. The candle on the windowsill had finally burned down. The drawing still hung in the hallway, soft crayon lines catching the moonlight. And I stood by the front door. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it called to me. Maybe something waited on the other side. But I felt it, a presence, not cold, not fearful, welcoming. Then the door handle moved, just slightly, slow, like someone testing it. I stared at it, frozen. Was this the end? The beginning? Was it my father? My younger self? Clara's sorrow? Or simply whatever comes next? And then it happened. A hand reached through. Not grotesque, not ghostly, human, familiar, feminine. The hand of a woman I hadn't seen in over a decade. Not in photographs, not in dreams, but in the deepest ache of my memory. Lila, my mother, gone since I was 11. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She simply reached forward and opened the door wide enough for me to see. Not a tunnel, not a heaven, not clouds, just light, stillness, a place where the pain I had worn like skin did not belong. I turned back one last time, to the house, to Clara, breathing deeply in the silence of earned rest, to Elise, dreaming without ghosts, to the candle wick, now a curl of smoke in the window, and then the softest voice behind me, You did what you came to do. I nodded, my eyes blurred not from tears but from release. And I said the only thing that mattered. Thank you for letting me stay long enough to understand. I reached for the hand, and for the first time since I died, I felt something again. Warmth, contact, forgiveness that didn't come from words, but from touch. The light folded around me like a sunrise that waited, not because it had to, but because it wanted me to see the end of this story. Somewhere far behind me, Elise stirred. She whispered in her sleep, "Has gone now," but he left the door open. I smiled and stepped through, not as a shadow, not as a regret, but as a man finally unburdened. A man who came back not to be saved, but to make sure no one else drowned where he had fallen. And in the home behind me, a new light bloomed. Subtle, lasting, the kind only love leaves behind when it learns how to stay. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.